In the year 614 AD, something so monstrous took place that even 14 centuries later, historians still speak of it with a shiver in their voice. The army of the Persian king, Khosrow II, marched into Jerusalem. But what happened to the nuns of that sacred city was worse than death itself. This is a story of power, cruelty, and the complete destruction of human dignity. And very few people know what truly happened behind the closed doors of the monasteries during those fateful days. If you're drawn to real history, the kind textbooks don't dare to tell, make sure you subscribe and leave a like. Every week, we open the darkest pages of the past. The year was 614. The Byzantine Empire was collapsing under one of the worst crises in its history. Khosrow II was not just a ruler. He was a conqueror, a man driven by a vision to crush everything Christian across the known world. His armies had already taken Syria, Egypt, and Asia Minor. Now, only one prize remained: Jerusalem, the holiest city in Christianity. The people of Jerusalem knew the Persians were coming. Refugees had arrived with horrifying stories: cities burned, populations slaughtered, lives erased overnight. But even then, no one could truly imagine what awaited them. Jerusalem was a city of prayer. Thousands of monks and nuns lived within its walls, having devoted their lives entirely to God. Monasteries stood across the city, massive stone structures with high walls and heavy gates. But the monks and nuns did not trust those walls to protect them. They believed their faith would. Day and night, they prayed for deliverance. They begged God to stop the army of Khosrow. But the army did not stop. In May of 614, Persian forces reached the walls of Jerusalem. Alongside them marched thousands of Jewish allies, many with their own grievances against the Christian city. The siege began. The first days were filled with thunder, the crash of siege engines, the screams of the dying. Massive catapults hurled stones weighing hundreds of kilograms, smashing into the ancient Roman-built walls. Piece by piece, the defenses began to crumble. The Byzantine garrison inside the city was small. Most of the empire's forces were tied up in distant wars. The defenders fought desperately, but they were outnumbered, outmatched, and running out of time. After 21 days, the walls fell. The Persian army flooded into Jerusalem like fire unleashed. What followed became one of the most horrifying tragedies of the early Middle Ages. Contemporary accounts described it as nothing less than an apocalypse. Within days, between 50,000 and 90,000 people were killed. The exact number varies, but every source agrees on one thing. It was mass extermination. Churches burned, monasteries were destroyed, sacred relics were looted. The most precious relic in Christianity, the true cross, was seized and carried off to Persia as a trophy of war. But in the midst of all that chaos, one group faced a fate more tragic than all the rest. The nuns of Jerusalem. Women devoted entirely to God. Women who had never held weapons. Women who had spent their lives in prayer, fasting, and silence within monastery walls. The Persian soldiers knew exactly where to find them. They went there deliberately. And when the heavy monastery doors finally gave way under the pounding of battering rams, something began that even the chroniclers could barely bring themselves to describe. One of the few witnesses was Antiochus Strategos, a monk who survived the invasion and later recorded everything he saw. His account, written in Greek, has survived to this day. He wrote that the nuns were not simply captured, they were dragged out. Soldiers burst into chapels, tearing women away from prayer. Some nuns did not even try to run. There was nowhere left to run. The entire city had already fallen. Others tried to hide in basements, in hidden rooms. They were found anyway. Antiochus describes scenes that freeze the blood. He writes of nuns who chose to throw themselves into fire or leap into wells rather than fall into the hands of the soldiers. Some succeeded. Others were caught before they could. And this is where the story turns truly terrifying, because in those days, for many of them, death was not the worst fate. What awaited the captured nuns was something so unbearable that even the strongest minds could break beneath it. Khosrow II had already given orders on how prisoners were to be handled. The nuns were not to be killed immediately. They were to be taken alive, bound, dragged away, and gathered in holding areas outside the city. There, they were left in the open air. No food, barely any water. The bodies of the dead all around them. And that was only the beginning. Outside the walls of Jerusalem, Persian slave traders were already waiting. They knew exactly what the fall of the city would bring. Human merchandise. And they were not disappointed. Soon, columns of captives were driven eastward. Among them walked the nuns, robes torn, hands tied, feet bleeding in the dust. Just days earlier, they had been singing psalms inside the safety of their monasteries. Now they were being marched across the roads of Palestine like slaves. Some collapsed from hunger and exhaustion. No one stopped for them. No one carried them. Whoever fell behind was simply abandoned to die. The road to Persia was not just long. It was hell stretched across the earth. For weeks, the columns moved through the brutal heat of the Near East. They crossed dry plains, rocky mountain passes, and river crossings under armed guard. Persian horsemen rode on both sides, watching for any sign of weakness, any attempt to stop. Water was scarce, food was worse. Antiochus Strategos wrote that many prisoners died before they ever reached Persian land. The elderly perished first, then children, then those whose bodies simply could not endure anymore. The nuns suffered in ways their bodies had never been prepared for. They had spent their lives behind monastery walls, in prayer and fasting, not on endless forced marches beneath a merciless sun. Their feet split open on sharp stones. Their wrists and hands were torn raw by rope. Their skin burned. Their strength vanished. But worse than the physical pain was the torment of the soul. These were women who had given everything to God. They had believed their faith would protect them. And now they were being driven like animals through foreign lands, unable to understand why such a trial had fallen on them. Some whispered prayers as they walked. Others no longer had the strength even for that. At each stop, Persian slave traders inspected the captives. They chose the youngest, the healthiest, the strongest. The nuns were looked over as if they were livestock, ordered to stand straight. Their faces lifted, their bodies examined, even their teeth checked. It was humiliation by design. Khosrow understood exactly what this meant. To conquer an enemy was one thing. To desecrate what that enemy held most sacred, that was something far deeper. To turn consecrated women into market goods was not random cruelty. It was a message. And once the captives reached Persian territory, they were divided and sent in different directions. Some were taken to the empire's great cities, Ctesiphon, Susa, Ecbatana. There, they were sold in open markets to wealthy nobles, merchants, and officials. The nuns of Jerusalem fetched especially high prices, not because they were ordinary slaves, but because they were trophies from the holiest city in Christianity. Owning one was a public symbol of dominance over a defeated faith. Their lives in Persian slavery were harsh. They were forced into labor they had never been meant to do, cleaning houses, working the fields, serving at feasts and banquets. And for many, the humiliation did not end there. Some masters tried to force them to renounce Christianity. They demanded worship of fire, the central symbol of the Zoroastrian faith. Most of the nuns refused. They paid dearly for it. Those who would not deny their belief were starved, beaten publicly, and sent to the hardest labor so that other captives would watch and learn fear. And yet, even there, many of them did not surrender. Stories spread among the prisoners of women who still prayed in secret at night while their masters slept. Women who traced tiny crosses in the dirt with a finger, then quickly erased them. Women who passed fragments of psalms to one another in whispers, as though they were sharing hidden treasure. But there was another side to this story, one that the chroniclers approached with extreme caution. Because not all of the nuns were sent into noble households. Some were taken somewhere else, somewhere that stood in direct opposition to everything those women had lived and breathed for. Khosrow II kept an enormous harem, and after the fall of Jerusalem, some of the captives were sent there, and for many of them, that was the fate worse than death. The story of the nuns who were taken into Khosrow's harem was hidden behind palace walls sealed away from the outside world. No one knew what truly happened inside. No one could help them. Those women vanished as silently as a candle flickering out in the wind. Outside, life in the Persian capital continued as if nothing had changed. Merchants traded in crowded bazaars. Soldiers marched through the streets. The empire moved forward. But behind the high walls of the royal palace, a tragedy unfolded, one the world would not fully understand for centuries. Khosrow's harem was vast. Some chroniclers, Arab and Armenian alike, claimed it held anywhere from 3,000 to 12,000 women. It was a city within a city, governed by its own rules, its own hierarchy, its own silent laws. New captives entered through guarded gates that closed behind them forever. There was no leaving. For the nuns, who had lived lives of spiritual freedom within the discipline of faith, this confinement was worse than any prison. The first thing taken from them was their identity. Their clothing was stripped away and replaced with Persian garments. Their names were changed, erased, and replaced with new ones. Crosses, rosaries, anything tied to their past life was confiscated and destroyed. It was not random. It was systematic, a deliberate dismantling of who they were. The overseers of the harem had done this many times before. They knew how quickly a person could be broken. Take away their past, and you take away their future. But the nuns resisted, quietly, invisibly, but relentlessly. They gave each other secret Christian names. They prayed at night, covering their faces with their hands so no one would see their lips move. They whispered fragments of scripture to one another, words remembered by heart, passed carefully like sacred contraband. Among them, a hidden brotherhood of faith began to form. It was fragile, but it was enough to keep them from falling into complete despair. Khosrow himself took an interest in the captives from Jerusalem. This was not personal curiosity, it was political theatre. To humiliate the holy women of Christianity was to symbolically crush Christianity itself. The Armenian historian Ceballos wrote that Khosrow boasted openly in his court. He displayed the captured true cross. He spoke proudly of Jerusalem's fall. And among his trophies were living people, the nuns. They came from different walks of life, young novices who had only just begun their vows, seasoned nuns who had spent decades in prayer, elderly abbesses who remembered Jerusalem in times of peace. Each of them endured the horror in their own way. The younger ones often broke fast to hope, slipping through their fingers. The older ones held on longer. They saw their suffering as a form of martyrdom, a continuation of the trials faced by early Christians. But not all could endure. Some did not break physically, but spiritually. Under constant pressure, isolation, and the complete absence of hope, they began to fade. Some accepted their new reality. Some forgot or tried to forget who they had once been. Antiochus Strategos wrote of this with pain, but without judgment. He understood something simple and devastating. A human being can only endure what they are given the strength to bear. No one has the right to condemn those who collapse under an unbearable weight. But there were others, those who never broke, those who died in captivity without ever renouncing their faith. Their names were never recorded. No monuments bear their faces. No one knows where they were buried. And yet, they became the true symbols of this tragedy. Nameless martyrs, their stories hidden behind palace walls and buried between the cautious lines of ancient chronicles. And their story forces us to ask a question that still echoes today. What does it mean to believe in something so deeply that no power on earth can make you abandon it? But the story does not end within the walls of the Persian palace. While the nuns suffered in silence, the rest of the Christian world slowly began to learn what had happened in Jerusalem. The news spread through refugees, wandering travelers, and letters that somehow survived the chaos. Each account was worse than the last. When the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius received these reports, he understood immediately the scale of the catastrophe was beyond anything they had faced before. Jerusalem had fallen. The true cross had been taken. Thousands of believers were in captivity, and among them, the nuns, whose fate many believed was worse than death. Heraclius was not a weak ruler. He was a soldier, a strategist, but this moment changed him. He became obsessed with one goal: to take it all back. He began raising an army. For the first time in Byzantine history, a special war tax was imposed on the church. The Patriarch of Constantinople, Sergius, handed over gold and silver from the church treasury. This was no ordinary war. It was a holy war, and everyone in the empire understood it. While Heraclius prepared his campaign, years passed in Persian captivity. Long, silent, suffocating years. The nuns, taken in 614, had no idea if anyone was coming for them. They did not even know if they had been remembered. Inside the harem, time moved differently, slow, heavy, like thick resin trapping everything in place. Some grew old and died without ever seeing freedom again. Others kept waiting, holding on to their faith as the last fragile thread connecting them to the life they had lost. Outside, the world was changing. Inside those walls, nothing changed at all. Until, in the year 622, Heraclius finally marched to war, and everything began to shift.